Hello, and welcome to the Raising Family Podcast, brought to you by thefamilyproclamation.org. I'm David Steele.
I'm Linda Hill.
And I'm Brent Anderson.
In this podcast, we'll explore both ancient and modern scripture, as well as quotes from living prophets.
We'll also discuss peer-reviewed scientific research that complements and confirms the clear, repeated, united teachings of the prophets.
Thank you for subscribing and joining us as we share stories that we hope will help bring the family of proclamation to the world into your world.
Hello and welcome to the Raising Family Podcast. I'm Linda Hill, and I'm really excited to talk about a new feature of the familyproclamation.org website. It's called All About Families, and it is filled with lesson plans that will help people articulate the different parts of the family proclamation to their families, to children, to friends, and to become more familiar with some of the doctrines and the principles there. And today we have some wonderful guests that have been part of a curriculum team that developed this curriculum. Before we introduce our guests, we are going to focus particularly on the second paragraph of the Family Proclamation. It says, all human beings, male and female, are created in the image of God. Each is a beloved spirit, son or daughter of heavenly parents, and as such, each has a divine nature and destiny. Gender is an essential characteristic of individual premortal, mortal, and eternal identity and purpose. So with that being said, I would like to introduce our guests. Today, I'm going to be interviewing Nathan and Jelaire Richardson. Hi, Nathan and Jelaire. We're excited to have you here.
Hi.
Hi, Linda.
And through the miracle of technology, we are speaking to them on the other side of the world. They're currently living in the Middle East. Jelaire is a blogger, a speaker, a graphic designer, a stay-at-home mom, and is currently homeschooling their 6 children. What are the ages of your children?
2 to 12.
2 to 12. So yes, they definitely have their own lab going right now with their home lab, trying all sorts of great things on these children of theirs. She has blogged for Latter-day Saint Women's Stand and spoken at various church events, including BYU Idaho Education Week, the Middle East Women's Conference, and various local and regional events for congregations where she has traveled, especially on topics that have to do with women, youth, and interfaith relations. Jelaire earned a bachelor's in sociology from BYU Idaho and a master's in social work as well. And she'll probably be discussing some of her experiences there. Nathan, Jelaire's husband, created the first scriptural annotated family proclamation in 1996 and has provided this site with hundreds of cross-referenced scriptures, including the scripture insert, which you can find on familyproclamation.org. He is a speech-language pathologist and has published multiple peer-reviewed articles. Nathan is also a book designer and has worked for multiple publishing houses, including the BYU Religious Studies Center, and he has owned his own document design business. Nathan has a master's in communication disorders from BYU, and he's currently working in the Middle East. So Nathan and Jelaire, why don't you tell us about this exciting new curriculum and how people can find it?
The website is thefamilyproclamation.org, and one of the top level menus at the top, you can see lessons. And then there's a short list of the lessons right in that menu.
And there's just a few to start out with, but we plan on adding more eventually.
Yeah, we have ideas for several more lessons.
Wonderful. Well, can you tell us why you feel we need curriculum about families?
So there have been several points, at least when I'm talking to my kids, where I feel like I know what I want to say, but I don't know either the right way to say it, or I'm not familiar enough with prophetic quotes to back something up, or so it just makes me stumble over my words a lot.
Yeah, and sometimes I know plenty of ways of explaining it that are common in popular media, but often there's so many assumptions in that language that I don't really want to convey to my kids, that I'd rather give them a gospel perspective, but that it takes practice to come up with alternate phrases and alternate ways of explaining things than is commonly done.
It's true. And I think that there's so many times as a parent that our heart longs to be able to say just the right thing. We know there's so many things in our heart, and there's so many things that we believe, and there's things in our experience, and trying to figure out how to translate into the right language for the right age and the right developmental stage that our children are at is difficult at best.
Yeah.
On so many topics. So you felt like these are some things that we needed some lesson plans on. Are there any other experiences you had that just helped drive you to coming up with a curriculum?
Yeah, another experience when my kids were about 8 and 10 years old. They had a little friend that they would play with every day, and she was playing outside with my kids, and they found a cat. And the girl said, "Oh, look, there's the cat that's in our neighborhood." And my daughter said, "Oh, I love her. She's so sweet." And our daughter's friend said, "Excuse me, did you just assume that cat's gender?" And I know she meant it, half joking, but the fact that it came up at all for, a 10-year-old was just, and my kids had no clue what she was talking about.
Was totally confusing for them, huh?
Yeah, they had never heard that before. And so generally, I like to introduce topics when it's on my own turf, right? I like to think about my kids as wet cement, and, they're very impressionable. And I'm okay introducing stuff on my own terms when they're a little bit older and their cement is set. They understand the doctrine clearly. But anyway, that was just one of the experiences that was really eye-opening, that helped me see that much of this content will be shown to them at some point in their lives via friends, via internet, via media.
I think that that is one of the difficult parts of parenthood, is we think we need this perfect situation to sit down and tell our child when we're ready. But too often they're being introduced concepts and ideas on the playground, at the neighbor's house, on television, social media. And so, yeah, our children are being bombarded, not just on the playground like we were as kids.
Yeah, you could say the only thing worse than having a subject introduced to your kid before you were ready is having it introduced to them without you being aware.
Exactly. Absolutely. So we've discussed that need for why. Now, how did you go about finding some of the curriculum for these lessons?
So the main resource was some research done by our nonprofit arm of the website. And they actually went out and interviewed Latter-day Saints, single adult Latter-day Saints from ages 18 to around 30. And what the research consisted of was asking them questions about basic doctrines of the Family Proclamation, asking them how they perceived those, asking them if they agreed with those things. And then they compiled the research to see where are we lacking in helping our kids not just understand it, but have testimonies of these things. And so basically the top 3 issues that a lot of these kids struggled with were identity and gender and truth. So basically moral relativism. Is there one truth? That is the truth. So those are 3 of the lessons that we first started with. And then we've added a couple more, and we'll be adding more.
And the results of that study can be found on the familyproclamation.org website. I read through it and I found it very fascinating. My husband is a YSA bishop, and we deal with that age group. And it really is fascinating to see at that age what is cemented in their knowledge and really what is not. That's what was really fascinating, is how many didn't seem to have a full understanding of some of these concepts. And so anyway, for anyone that would like to visit that and see what those results were, it is definitely eye-opening.
Yeah, I taught the 15-year-olds in Sunday school for 4 years, and the kids are so hungry for truth. During the lesson in the Come Follow Me program about chastity, it said, let the kids submit questions that they have about chastity. And one of the youth told me, "And don't you tell us only do what you're comfortable with. That is not an answer. If the prophets have talked about it, I want to know what they've said." And they are hungry for truth. They want to be challenged, and they will do hard things if they know it's worth doing.
Oh, wow. I do think that there is that element with these younger people that they are seeking. I think a lot of them do see that we are on very unsteady ground. And I think often they hear and see things that society says is normal, that deep down, in their spirits, ingrained in them, they know may not be quite right. So I think they are seeking that truth. And that's fascinating. So when you were looking for information and lessons, I mean, what did you find that was out there?
I started by just trying to contact homeschooling companies, and I contacted all the major homeschooling companies. So we've homeschooled for a long time, and so I'm familiar with many of the large ones. And so I just contacted all of them and asked them if they had lessons about families and family structures and the hot button family issues that are around. And none of them had any curriculum or resources specifically tailored to that. I had several who recommended books that were helpful about the topics, but nothing that was
digestible for a 10-year-old.
Aimed at, bite-sized lessons.
That story really illustrates that our young people are craving clarity, that they see things that aren't jiving with what they feel inside, but yet don't know quite how to articulate it themselves. I think it shows that there's a real need for something that will allow us to articulate better the principles in the Family Proclamation. So you two were particularly involved in the lessons on gender. And you were talking about maybe not being able to find materials out there. How are these materials different than anything you have seen on the subject?
Well, I couldn't find anything, actually. I tried looking several places for anything that was just short lessons for kids, especially appropriate for kids, because I have a wide range of kids, and I wanted something that I could do with a 6-year-old or 8-year-old and something I could do with my 12-year-old. And I just couldn't find anything out there. And so this was another way that I could feel like, well, I might as well just create our own, right? and I feel like it's not even something that I uniquely could do. I feel like there should be a huge market for Latter-day Saints creating their own family proclamation curriculums, and we pick and choose the best. Like, I feel like this should be out there and lots of people should be doing this, but I just couldn't find it anywhere. So maybe it exists, who knows? But I hope it's something that people start doing, because it's just one of the most pressing needs and talked about topics. Whenever I talk with moms, it comes up all the time.
I agree in the pressing need. And I agree that every day we wake up wondering what the new issue of the day is. Things seem to be changing so quickly in our society that it's very hard to keep up. Things that I was talking to parents about a year ago, and they would look at me like, what are you referring to? I haven't heard that. Have all of a sudden come back to me a year later saying, do you remember we were talking last year? Can you tell me again this book or whatever it was you were talking about? Because all of a sudden my children are coming home and mentioning things that I've never heard before. And that's how quickly the environment is changing in which our children are growing up. And I think that there's so many questions, not that just that children have, but parents have, because any scripts we have used in the past are out the window because we're just dealing with new things, especially with technology and things that we didn't have as children. We don't even have a model from our own parents how to deal with. So I appreciate you emphasizing that need. And it sounds like there wasn't curriculum. Now, what sets this apart from all the other lesson plans that the church has?
So, yeah, the Come Follow Me program has fantastic principles. The Come Follow Me program is in a scriptural sequence, not topical. And so in some ways, we try to teach a lot of the same principles that they're covered in Come Follow Me, but in these lessons, it's easier to find them topically.
So explain more what you mean by finding the topic.
Well, I mean, and the church also has topical manuals. It has the Eternal Marriage manual, and it has the Parents Guide, which are great. Both of those are, the way they're arranged is as resources. The Parent Guide is fantastic, but it's written for a parent to read to themselves. But what we've done is gone the next step and said how to deliver this to your 6-year-old and your 10-year-old, and your 16-year-old.
Give us an example. What are some of the favorite parts of these lessons that you have felt, especially with your young family?
Well, in the lesson where we talk about how the two genders are of equal value, I took an analogy from C.S. Lewis, and you show them a pair of scissors and show how the two parts of the scissors are shaped differently, but which one's more important? Well, they're both important for cutting. You couldn't do the cutting without it. And if they were both shaped exactly the same, it couldn't do its job as well. They have to work together in complementary shapes in order to be most effective. And a 6-year-old can get that.
I love that. And that's so quick, that object lesson. Mm-hmm. And they know what scissors are. Right. And every time they look at a pair of scissors, they will remember the lesson. I think that's what's so great about object lessons is once you see something visually, then whenever you see that object again, you remember even lessons and things that go with that. So that's fascinating. Can you talk about some of the groups that you've taught this to and some of the experiences that you've had? Have you been able to experiment with other age groups or settings? Because I think these lesson plans would be great in many different settings.
Yeah, so we've done it with our kids. We've done it with other people's kids in a group we were in, ages, I don't know, maybe 7 to 10, around that age group as well. We haven't done teenagers yet, but I know other people who have done teenagers, and they responded really well. In fact, one of the girls, when we taught the lesson where we have them, it's actually the lesson about labels and identity and labels we give ourselves. And she was really excited when she found out that these permanent labels that we affix to ourselves of gender existed before we were born, and we will always be girls or boys, and that gender isn't something attached to what we like. It's not attached to something that we feel, but it's attached to our eternal spirits that God created. She was so excited. She
kind of stood up and went, yeah.
It was really cute. So that was just one of those little moments where you're like, oh, I'm glad this is resonating with someone. And I hope she remembers that when she comes across.
And as the kids sorted the labels into a group of permanent versus a group that's passing, they noticed that most labels are passing. They're not permanent, but the list of things that are permanent was very short, and they all had to do with our eternal identity as children of God.
I love that. So that truth really struck a chord with her. And that goes to show that there's a lot of confusion flying around, and to give her something solid to hold on to. And I think that's what these lessons are all about, is giving our children and our families something solid in this world of shifting norms and shifting values. It's, have you ever tried to walk in a fun house on something, or one of those, a hanging bridge or anything like that? It's the scariest feeling to not feel that the earth underneath you is not solid. And I think that that's kind of what these principles and these doctrines give our children, is a steady, firm foundation to walk on and to live their lives.
Right. And I feel like, I'm spending an hour teaching my kids math every day, or an hour with language arts. And why would I not spend the same amount of time teaching them eternal principles that will help them strengthen their testimonies and wade through a crazy world? And so I felt like parents have been given all the resources in the world for good things like academics, but there aren't as many resources for our currently shifting values in our culture right now. So,
right.
We make kids take a semester-long course in driver's ed before we give them a driver's license, but we send them off into the dating world with good luck, and here's some sitcoms to follow the model of.
Right. Yes, or other popular shows that have nothing to do with the realities of relationships, right? Yes. So explain to me open and go. We were talking about some of these features. I have not homeschooled, and some of these terms, I don't know what they mean. So what is an open and go feature?
Right. When I first started homeschooling, I quickly came to realize that my style was, I don't have a lot of time, or maybe I don't schedule it well. I'm not sure which one, but I just appreciated lessons that didn't take 30 minutes to gather all the materials before I could start teaching. So open and go is just a term I first came across in the Good and the Beautiful curriculum, where it's just you open up the curriculum and you can basically start right there. You don't need to read the lesson beforehand. You can just go as is. And
it's a script. It says, mom or parent, say this.
Yeah. And of course, you don't have to use the script. If you feel comfortable veering off of the script, that's fine. But we did want to make it super simple for parents who felt like they even needed a script. And then once you get more comfortable with talking about some of these things, you're totally free to follow the Spirit and
put it in your own words.
Yep. Go where it leads.
Wow. I love that feature. I think that was, without knowing, that was often how I taught my children. Often it was in a car. And because I think sometimes we think there's this perfect setting that has to exist to sit down, sit the children all down. They're all going to be well behaved as we focus on a certain topic that's very important, and everyone's going to pay attention, and it's not going to be awkward. And rarely does that happen. I think my children learned the facts of life in a car going about 80 miles an hour between Montana and Utah in the dark. And I thought, man, this is the perfect opportunity. Nobody can leave. The doors are closed. We're barely down the highway.
We don't have to look at each other's faces.
No one has to look at each other's and all the awkwardness could just be sucked into the darkness in this car. And we had some great conversations. In fact, one was just so good. By the time we arrived home, I told my husband, you missed it. It's too bad. So sad. You weren't there. I was with the kids. We had this great discussion. The kids asked questions, I think because some awkwardness was taken out just in that situation. And I've told many of my friends, yep, the facts of life, do it on the next road trip. Lock them in the car. Nobody can go anywhere. And that's the thing about just having the materials. These are awkward subjects and they're sensitive subjects, but they are so, so important to the plan of happiness.
Right.
Helping these children truly understand who they are is what is going to help them navigate this crazy world that we're living in right now. And so they're important.
Yeah, I found that one of the mistakes that I had mentally was, as I was becoming a parent, was parents always want to know, how do you have the talk? Well, that's a mistake because it's not the talk.
Right.
It's the talks. It's many talks.
Exactly.
Yeah, and if you think you're going to cover it all in one talk, you're mistaken. But I have found that when I'm driving my daughter to Young Women's, that's when I have her alone, and that's when we get to talk about the stuff we can't talk about in front of the 6-year-old, and that's when you try to pull out some of this preparation you've done by reading through a lot of church material and general conference and thinking through some of the explanations we've tried to write for these lessons. If you fill your head with that material, it's like a funnel. You put it all in, and then the Spirit can help you pull out the right stuff. But we have to give the Spirit the raw materials to work with by filling our heads with lots of good things so that he can pull out the right words for us in those teaching moments.
And that's what we were trying to aim for, is just giving the parents the vocabulary and the ideas and the doctrine, the analogies, everything in their head. So even if they don't have the curriculum in front of them, even if they've read it, they could be doing the dishes with their kids and start up a conversation. And, everyone's hands are busy, so no one is staring each other in the face. And I found those are great ways to bring these things up, even if you don't have the lessons in front of you.
I think that's great. That really gives parents some powerful tools, giving them the words and the analogies. Yes, I think that's fantastic. Now, do you feel like these lessons are appropriate in other settings, such as young men, young women, seminary? What are some other places these lessons could be used?
I would say they are a fantastic resource. Obviously they're not on the officially sanctioned church resources, which is why I would say don't just use this as your lesson plan, but I would say study up and understand the material in it. And, you can use this as a resource for your lessons that you're preparing about these topics. Absolutely.
For example, in the Come Follow Me lesson on Moses 1 and Abraham 3, that was at the beginning of the year, it suggests spending time talking about labels and identity. It has a quote from Elder Uchtdorf saying that we need to understand who we are, and that's a perfect chance to use the little sorting exercise, sorting labels that are permanent versus passing. So there's ways to weave in some of the ideas into principles that Come Follow Me encourages us to bring up.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I love that in their entirety, the lessons might be 20 to 30 minutes long, but that each part is separate. And that's, like you're discussing, just a video here or an analogy here. Mm-hmm. Because, like you said, I think these important talks are not just the talk. They are definitely installments. And my children have been known to laugh. And I said, you guys ready for another installment? They know what that means. We're going to take it to the next level and talk about something that's more pertinent to the situation that they're in. All of a sudden when they're in college and they're dating, there's a whole other level of things that need to be talked about with boundaries and things. And so I love that, making sure parents understand that there's not just one talk. Check, done.
Right. Right. And that was one thing that we struggled with at the beginning, was how do we make sure the 6-year-old or the 12-year-old is getting as much out of this as the 6-year-old, or the 18-year-old is getting as much out of this as the 6-year-old. And so we just added a little section in every lesson called Deep Dive. And all that is it's just going a little bit deeper, or, with a little bit more nuance into these topics. And so, maybe your 6-year-old is not ready for that, and you can tell at a glance which section you maybe want to skip if you have other little ears in the room.
Yeah, one of the curriculum team members had experience writing lessons for charter schools, had written hundreds of lessons, and so she came with a great outline that we kind of used the same outline for all the lessons. And the deep dive section, the other sections are where we put the basic principles and the simple analogies and activities. And then the deep dive section is usually where you would put content for older kids, where you say, now that we talked about this principle, here's how we apply it to those difficult issues you're hearing about in high school. And so it's easy to skip if you're with the younger kids, but easy to spend time on with the older kids.
So you've been talking wonderfully about these lesson plans and how they help, particularly those who are raising children currently, younger children, those who are planning families. Those are sort of in the thick of it, right? So we have a very vast audience, all different stages of life. And give me some hope for those people who might be thinking, oh, I wish I'd had this before, because now my children have fallen prey to some of these philosophies, or they're struggling with different things. Now, how do we back the bus up? I can't go back and do it again. How do we find hope? Because there are, or what about children? Because now I think at all ages, we have children that are getting messages and are getting confused at a very young age. How do we handle those situations in context of these lessons?
Yeah, one of the things that we really wanted to get across is that these lessons aren't just for kids who haven't experienced or heard about any of the worldly philosophies out there. We really wanted this to be for all families, even if they're in the thick of their struggles. And so there were several times where we would be phrasing something or writing a lesson, and we just felt like, if I had a child in the room who was struggling with the idea of marriage, or, confused about their gender, how would they feel with this sentence? And so we wanted to, A, present the truth, but B, in a way that was still loving. And so we really went through these lessons and we tried to make it as clear as possible, but also as gentle as possible.
And some of the plans we have, some of the irons we have in the fire for future lessons are really like meta lessons. It's how to talk about things, how to civilly disagree, how to love someone who is choosing differently than you. So they're really not just true principles, but how to talk about true principles. And so these are some of the topics we plan to address in other lessons. Some of these, I guess you could call them soft skills.
That sounds really exciting and even applicable to a broader audience.
Yes, definitely. You can definitely tell these. You can definitely share these lessons with people who are not Latter-day Saint.
I recently had an experience with some of my neighbors on my street. We have a wonderful group of people that are they're Christian. They're trying to do well by their kids. They're concerned about a lot of the things that are going on. And recently, there's about 4 of us that are speaking fairly regularly about things that are happening in the school and public policy. And it just came up. I was able to share with them some things because they have serious concerns. These are mothers whose hearts are just all in, and they're concerned and they're worried. And I felt sort of inspired when we were together one evening. There were 3 of us there, and I read the proclamation. I felt like it was the right thing to do because we had talked about a lot of things that were worrisome, but I wanted to end on a hopeful note with what we were talking about and give them something to hold on to. And I very spontaneously just read the proclamation and bore testimony to these wonderful women that if they put Christ at the center of their homes, that he was aware of what they were trying to do and that he was going to be their greatest advocate with their children. And even imperfectly and spontaneously, it had an impact. One of my friends had tears rolling down her cheeks when we were done because they just want what's best for their kids.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is really important is in the church, we need to become masters of testifying of truth, even if we don't fit the ideal. I think a lot of times in our society, we feel like we use the words authentic a lot, right? And we do want to be authentic, but there's a way to do that where you can testify of the ideal, even if you're not living it. And that's okay. Every time the ideal comes up, we shouldn't have to feel like we need to jump in and say, but I don't fit the ideal. That's okay. Most people don't fit some ideal in one way or another, right? In fact, no one on earth is perfect.
Sometimes in the church, we feel like when we go to teach a truth, we feel like we have to soft pedal it because so in the Ensign magazine a few years ago, they had an issue on the family proclamation. And it was great because the very first article had a picture of this ideal family. And it said, what if my family doesn't look like this? Like they just right out of the gate, they answered the really hard question that always comes up in the minds of people whenever you're talking about doctrines of family is what if my family doesn't look like this? What hope is there for me? And it's really important to be sensitive and to accommodate and make people feel welcome when they're still working to shape their life to realize those ideals. But it's also important to not feel too frightened to teach truth. I find it notable that, for example, Elder Oaks teaches the importance of having, a father in the home, how kids needed both a mom and a dad, even though Elder Oaks didn't have his father growing up because his father died when he was very young. So he was raised by basically a single mom. Elder Bednar talks about the importance of marrying in the covenant so that both parents are members and can raise the kids, even though Elder Bednar's dad growing up was not a member. Sherry Dew talks about the importance of being married eternally, even though she's never been married. Harold B. Lee talks about the importance of going on a mission, even though Harold B. Lee didn't go on a mission. So there's this pattern of people whose lives didn't fit the ideal, but who nonetheless testified of truth boldly. You can do both. You can teach truth and be gentle to loving and accommodating at the same time without sacrificing either one.
Right. And there's nothing hypocritical about teaching truth, even when it doesn't fully apply. I think that we need ideals. I was speaking to a high school friend last night, and she was raised, her parents were divorced, and her mother's been remarried a few times. And she now currently has just a beautiful family. She's been married for 33 years with 5 children. And we were discussing just how wonderful it is to have these ideals. And she says, I needed a pattern to follow after so that I knew that I didn't want what I had. And I somehow had to have a template. And I think that's what the family proclamation is. That's what these lessons are, is giving people a template for how to succeed. And there's nothing hypocritical about teaching the truth, even when it doesn't fully apply. And I appreciate you bringing that up.
Like Elder Uchtdorf said, if our definition of hypocrite is someone who teaches something that they don't fully live, well, then everyone's a hypocrite, and then it ceases to be a useful term. But that's not how the Savior used it. Yeah, the Savior granted grace to all of us to teach things, even though we don't always fulfill the model.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. And President Hinckley said a nation can rise no higher than the state of their homes. And I feel like these lessons just give a starting point for families to start. Helping our kids become better kids. Sometimes we pawn that off to schools or daycares or other programs. But I feel like we just, as Latter-day Saints, we need to get better at creating and using our God-given talents to building up the kingdom and helping strengthen families, really. And so I just hope this is one of those lessons that helps kids understand doctrine more and to feel like their voice matters and they can be confident in talking about the doctrine of the family proclamation, and parents can feel confident and they know that they can make a difference, and that people are watching them and they really, really want their input and their insight, even though it goes against the grain of a lot of what's taught, that really in the homes is where it's going to start to make a difference.
I think our prophet has very much prepared us for this. I mean, a few years ago when we moved the Come Follow Me to be more family focused and put that responsibility back on the parents, hopefully we're more in that mode. And now we can just go to this familyproclamation.org website and add these lessons in with what we're already doing. Hopefully we are becoming better teachers and taking that responsibility more seriously as parents, and that these lesson plans will just be a natural branch of the things that we're already teaching our children in our home. I really appreciate you two for joining us today. And I know that it's probably bedtime where you guys are in the Middle East. We have a very big time difference that we're dealing with, and we're grateful for you taking the time and putting these lesson plans together. And we look forward to seeing what other lessons may even develop. But thank you so much for coming. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Linda.
Nice to see you guys.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Raising Family Podcast. This episode was produced by Carol Rice. Our research coordinator is Angela Valentine. Audio was edited and mixed by John Wright. The Raising Family Podcast is brought to you by thefamilyproclamation.org.